I'm Rachel,
I'm Ivy.
and we are Swords and Sapphics, a podcast all about queer media, representation, and women with a capital W.
Hello.
Hello!
What are we talking about today? I can't think of anything new to say.
I know we need a new opening, but
We do.
it's not about what we're talking about so much as who we're talking to.
Oh my God, who are we talking to?
We're talking to Stephanie Burgis about wooing the Witch Queen.
Beautiful.
Okay?
Yes, we are. We are. But before we get into that, I don't know actually if we have anything to talk about. What are we enjoying these days?
We don't really because we've been recording back to back.
We have.
And I'm not doing a lot. I'm not doing an awful lot. I'm loving Abbott's Elementary and Lara Croft, but we talked about those. We've
Yeah,
done that.
we did. And I'm still on Castle. I think I'm gonna be for a minute. And though I think I'm feeling that I want to start re-listening to Ilana Andrews' books on audiobook.
Yeah.
That's really the only thing that I have going for me now.
Well, in this episode, we talked to Stephanie about romantasy, and this one is the first in a trilogy of standalone romances. And the women are the ones in power, which is beautiful.
Mhm.
But let's talk about romantasy. What are your favorite romantasies?
Oh my God. Honestly, I feel like this is a thing that I've always tried without it being a genre because when we were talking to Stephanie, all I could think of was what's her face? Presley Cole. Yes. Presley Cole, which was the first smut I've ever read. That was
Hmm.
vampires and Valkyries and werewolves and all kinds of magical creatures. There was a ghost the one time. It
Hmm.
was so good. I really loved it. So that was all in my head the entire time I was thinking that. Um, that sentence didn't make any sense, did it? Anyway,
I don't know anymore.
anyway, I mean, I don't know. I can't tell I have a favorite because I've read so much of it. I just love it
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah.
It's the
I
two
think
my
there's
favorite
just more
genres.
room for great things. I love contemporary romance, but there's so much room for more in romantasy, like
Yeah.
the really high stakes,
Yes.
like yeah, and
The
just being
angst.
able to escape,
Yeah.
and swords and sapphics.
Yeah. And pain and danger and
Yeah, and sometimes dragons.
oh yes, me love some dragon. Yeah, do you have any?
Well, it's not really romantasy, I guess, but the first time I really was into fantasy was with either The Secret Circle or Cassandra Clare. I'm not sure which I started first, which I still have on my shelf. But like I said it in the interview with Stephanie, but it was like one of the first genres that I really loved, like fantasy and romance combined.
Yeah.
I loved the Wolves of Mersey Falls series by Maggie Stiefvater with the werewolf. That was great.
Is it the one that did the Raven Boys?
Yes, yeah.
Oh. She had beef with Halsey that one time.
Did she? What do you mean?
When they were beefing on Twitter for a while.
Oh my God, about what?
No idea, I don't remember, but it was so strange.
That is a very strange crossover, isn't it?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess now I love Rebecca Thorne, as we mentioned. I love
Sarah Hawley.
Sarah Hawley. It's not probably classed as a romantasy, but Emily Wilde's the combination between the fantasy
Mm,
and the romance is
that was a good
exceptional.
one. That's really
Told in a completely different format than most fantasy books that
yeah.
we
I mean, I remember, but that's an urban fantasy, but it had a romance storyline there, which was Alex Croft series. Like she was this necromancer witch who solved cases and she was on PI. And first of
Ooh.
all, she hooked up with a death, which I wasn't a fan of, weirdly enough. But there was this Fae Knight who was like a Faye version of FBI agent, but he was like this Ice Queen's knight who was under her control. So even when they fell in love, like they couldn't be together because she kept him in the ice court and she went for him, and it was so good. So good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
phenomenally good. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny
Well,
that
should
it's a genre
sorry.
now, but like we've always read it. Like it's nothing new.
I know, like I was surprised that that it kind of was becoming a big thing just in the few recent years.
Yeah.
Because I guess like romantasy, the word, I guess I was seeing it much more on TikTok in recent years, which I mean TikTok has so much influence over kind of reading habits and what sells and
Yeah.
things like that. But it's always been like all I want and all I've wanted for like 10 years, 12, 13 years is a good fantasy with a good romance in it. Like that's all I've ever been looking for. So it is interesting to kind of see how it works.
I think there's also like there's actually a difference between like fantasy with romance and romantasy because apparently
Yeah.
like you can't take out the romance from romantasy because then it
Mhm.
wouldn't be able to still be a fantasy, which
Yeah.
I do enjoy sometimes. Like I enjoy the romance part in like a fantasy setting, but I do prefer when there is much more going on outside of that.
Mm,
Like I sometimes want more plot, but it depends really on what kind of mood I am.
yeah.
And these days you can tell from the book cover what to expect, really. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I agree with that actually. I do prefer a balance, especially with the books that are popular on TikTok that are written by straight people.
hmm.
Like one that springs to mind is Jennifer Armentrout. I enjoyed the first book and I was like, okay, this is what I like. But it wasn't enough somehow. Like it didn't feel like something that I would I wanted to read. It was
Okay.
something like that I can understand why people liked it, but there was just something not there for me. And the writing style wasn't the best either. Um, yeah. But I was also thinking about that word marketable a lot.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to me because I think there are so many things publishers could sell if they could kind of be bothered going out of their comfort zone to do it. Like any book could really be marketable if they put enough resources behind it and money,
Yeah.
but it's just what they're kind of willing to do. Well, shall we get into it?
Yes, let's get into it. Enjoy our interview with Stephanie.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Of course. I'm Stephanie Burgis. I grew up in America, as you can hear from my voice, but I met my British husband in a writing workshop in 2001, and I have lived here ever since, almost since 2002. I've been in Wales for the last 15 years of that, and I write both uh, fantasy rom-coms for adults and middle grade adventures for kids, and I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, it's interesting that your accent doesn't change, or does it? Do you feel the change in it? Or no?
Well, the funny thing is, everyone here says, "Wow, you still have the full American accent." But when I go back home, people always like they're saying, "Are you? Where are you from exactly?" If I haven't met them, because it's just that slight
Mm.
shift, which is terrible. I don't want to end up in that. When I lived in Vienna for a while, people there used to say Arnold Schwarzenegger had was accented in his German too, like he was hard to
Mhm.
understand for Austrian Germans. So I don't want to be there.
Good. Well, tell us a little bit about Wooing the Witch Queen and what inspired you to write it.
Yes, so my next book coming out in like a week and a half is
Mhm.
Wooing the Witch Queen. It is the first in a trilogy called Queens of Villany, and it is a reverse sort of gothic where the heroine is the sinister, powerful sorceress who lives in an ominous castle up high in the mountains with what looks to outsiders like her monstrous minions and
Mm.
is actually her found family. And the hero is the sweet, more innocent, slightly younger guy who comes and ends up getting a job as her librarian of magic under a secret identity because she doesn't realize he is actually the person she's thought of all her life as her mortal enemy. And
We
so
love
the
to
story
see.
all comes out from there.
Amazing. I can't wait to read it. The cover's gorgeous as
Yeah.
well.
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
we dropped in that we were recording with you for our listener questions, and someone said, "Who designed the cover? It's gorgeous."
Oh, isn't it gorgeous? Let me double check. The jacket design was by Siobhan Hooper, and the illustration was by Jessica Cruikshank.
Amazing. So, where did your love of romantasy begin, and were you influenced by any other authors or books?
Honestly, I have been looking for romantasy since I was a kid because when I was around a tween, I discovered Georgette Heyer and all sorts of other and Mary Stewart and Nora Lofts, Victoria Holt, all these other like gothic romance or historical romance authors. And at the same time, I had been loving fantasy ever since I was a little kid when my dad read me, of course, Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia. So putting them together has always been my sweet spot. And I always, from the time I was a teenager, I was one of those people who, back when I was a teenager in the 1990s, people used to sort of hide the fact there was romance in a fantasy. Like you wouldn't be able to guess it from looking at the cover because they were very concerned that then male readers wouldn't pick it up or something. So it was kind of like a treasure hunt. And I used to be one of those readers who would pick up a book, think, oh, this looks interesting, and then flip to the end to see if there was a romance element in it because you never be able to tell from the cover. And so I've been loving it as a reader all my life. And I just really imprinted on a bunch of them that I read as a teenager, like Lord of the Two Lands by Judith Tarr and Emma Bull's War for the Oaks, things like that fantasies with a strong romantic element. So I always wanted to write it. And my first book I ever got an agent with, actually, back in 2005, was romantasy, although that wasn't a name for a subgenre at that point. And because of the weird shifts of market, it didn't end up getting published until 2016. And even at that point, romantasy still wasn't that hot buzzword yet, and it wasn't seen as a super commercial option. So actually, you might struggle to figure out that those my first two traditionally published adult books were romantasies because you couldn't necessarily tell from the covers. I was so frustrated because I would get the bad reviews would be from people saying there was romance in my fantasy. I was like, yes, that's the deal. That's the story. But I even remember there was an online magazine back when I first got those published that it originally said that, like with all of the other books from my particular publisher, they would run an excerpt and they would hold a giveaway. And then they actually found out more about the books. And they said, well, we're not doing an excerpt. We will do a giveaway if you rewrite the jacket copy to take out any hint of romance.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to take out any hint. And since it was already a fairly subtle hint, that meant I had to take out all the female names.
Wow.
And because, we have to appeal to the male readers who hate romance, even though they wouldn't like the book. So I am just thrilled that finally now here we are in 2025 and romantasy is absolutely flourishing.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because some of the first books that I really loved reading were like YA, romance, and fantasy combined.
Yes,
like it was so normal in that kind of age group. But
I think that's actually one of the reasons for this whole cultural phenomenon people talk about with, so many adults are reading YA. And it's like, yeah, because for a long time, that was where you could find this fantastic and very open, combination of great fantasy and romance.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, as an experienced author in this genre, what have you learned on your journey and what makes a great romantasy, in your opinion?
Wow. I mean, most of what I've learned in my journey after, let's see, it's 2025 now, and I sold my first trilogy in 2008. So I guess that's 17 years. I have learned that stubbornness is the best possible quality for a long-time author, because I don't know a single successful long-time author who has not gone through horrible, bleak stages in their career where they really thought this is not working anymore, or this is never going to work again. I will never sell another book, and you just have to keep powering through it and stay as flexible as possible. One of the things that I did was, so after my first trilogy, which was actually a middle grade Regency fantasy trilogy, where it is starring the little sister of the typical Regency heroines, and they're all having romances and she's having magical adventures. And after that sold, I struggled to come up with another book that would sell for a while. And that was for all sorts of different reasons. But I thought I had to keep going in the same genre where I'd sold first. Mm-hmm. So I was like shutting off all of my ideas for possible adult romantasy, even though I'd written that first. And I never, that was what I kept on reading for fun. But actually, the next two books I sold were these two adult romantasies that I had written back in 2005 and 2006, because finally the market had shifted and people were ready for it. Part of why they hadn't sold was back in 2005, my first one, Masks and Shadows, which was a romantasy. Part of what happened was it kept going to editorial meetings and people would say, this is great, but I don't know how to sell this. I don't know who we'd pitch it to. And part of the, quote unquote problem is that the romantic hero was bi, like I am, and he was a castrato opera singer. And so like all in all, that was just too weird for what they were looking for, and I'm saying weird in quotation marks.
Yeah.
And whereas in 2015, actually that turned out to be more of a selling point, which was great. I was so happy about that. And so, part of what I've learned is, stay flexible. Don't let yourself get boxed in. And that's why when the next year I ended up making this fantastic sale of a middle grade trilogy that it sold so well. It was really going to support my whole family. It was great. But I knew I couldn't write one middle grade book and one adult book every year at that point in my life, because I had two young kids and I've got Emmy, and there was just no way. But I was determined not to give up on romantasy, because I thought I've been here before. I have thought, oh, this is what I'm going to write for the rest of my life. And you never know what's going to happen in this industry, for better or for worse. So at that point, I started self-publishing, and I was aiming for one novella every year. And that gradually shifted over the years. And, one book that I'd written back in 2010, which my then agent had said was unmarketable, and he was right, was called Scales and Sensibility. And it is an adult fantasy rom-com novel that I ended up releasing on my Patreon in 2021, where it did so well. And then I self-published it more widely, and it got, it had it mentioned in the New York Times. It was ridiculous. And so I kept on going with that. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that my agent called me and said, I've just been to the Bologna Literary Festival. Everyone's talking romantasy. You write romantasy. Give me something I can sell. I was like, I don't know. I like the flexibility of self-publishing. It's low pressure. And she's like, well, just give me 3 chapters and a proposal. Let's just give it a try. You can say no. And I gave it to her, and she sold the Queens of Villany trilogy at auction for, best deal of my life. And so here I am now, and I'm focusing on my adult romantasy, because that's where, the industry is now and I love it so much. I love that I'm back here finally, after when it was what I wanted in the first place.
You came a full circle.
Absolutely.
Amazing. And publishing seems so bleak at the minute that this was actually really good for me to hear.
Yes, it is. It's terribly bleak in a lot of ways. But what I would say after 17 years is, don't go chasing after like whatever is the hot new thing, because by the time you finish writing it, it may well not be. And then you've wasted your time.
Yeah.
And you can never guess which books are going to be a hit, whether, that means selling really well to a trusted publisher, whether that means selling lots of copies through self-publishing. You cannot predict it. So you have to write books that you love, that give you joy, because otherwise, what was the point? Yeah. And I'm just incredibly lucky that publishing has actually come around. 2005 was 20 years ago, when I was first trying to sell romantasy. And now I would never have dreamed that romantasy would be the hot new buzzword, but here we are. And it's just such luck when the publishing industry happens to turn in the direction that you were going all along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it worth the wait?
It was, because it turned out that I love middle grade also. And I mean, the reason I started writing middle grade was because I had discovered some fantastic middle grade authors, and I was reading them, as an adult and thinking, this is great. I want to try this.
Yeah.
And it's always great to do different things and explore and have fun and stretch yourself and.
Yeah. So the romance in this book includes tropes such as mistaken identity. Do you
Mhm.
have any favorite tropes that you'd like to explore in future books or any in past books that stick out to you?
Oh, so many. I mean, I am such a huge fan of fake dating, fake betrothals, and I've done that twice now in previous stories. I'm sure I'll do it dozens of times again because I will never get sick of fake dating. But in this particular trilogy, I'm excited that I get to explore so many. Um, so in book 2, Enchanting the Fae Queen, which I just turned into my editor, the first draft, that's Enemies to Lovers, which I've never done before. And book 3 is Marriage of Convenience. And I am very psyched about that. I just started writing it this week. This is a marriage of convenience between a queen with literal, she is literally an ice queen. She has icy power. She can manipulate ice. She can see far distances if she can make the connection with, some little patch of ice there, etc. And she ends up in a marriage of convenience with a priestess who is very, very fiery, and they're so much fun to write together.
So sapphic.
Yes,
so
it is.
Oh my
Yes,
God.
it is. I'm so
ready.
happy because so the first book, I should have said earlier, Wooing the Witch Queen, the heroine is bi, and her ex-girlfriend is someone who is still very much a part of her life. And I know there's a trope in a lot of romance about, oh yeah, the wicked ex, and this is not that. Saskia and Mariana, who is now her first minister, helping to run the kingdom, they were not meant for each other for various reasons, and they can still irritate each other like nobody else. But they also, they both really want the best for their kingdom. They both care about each other's welfare. And I wanted to make sure that, as a bi woman myself, that kind of representation is just really important to me. So, it's very conscious, and in book 2, Enchanting the Fae Queen, that is a more straightforward hetero romance between the heroine who's straight and the hero who's straight. But the heroine's 2 handmaidens are in the middle of having a romance with each other, and one of them is a trans woman. And, so I want to make sure that every story that I put out is inclusive and it has the representation that I'm looking for. I still remember how excited I got. I don't even remember what age I was. As a teenager, I was reading an Amanda Quick historical romance, and it just came up at some point in the book, and this is in the 1990s, so this is not everyone was shocked because, the hero, he had broken off the previous engagement, but he hadn't challenged anyone to a duel. So maybe he was making it up, or maybe, who knows what could have been going on. And of course, what had happened is he had walked in on his fiance with her girlfriend. And the heroine of this book completely gets it from the first moment because she was raised by 2 women who were lovers and, who raised her as her parents. And I remember being a teenager, and it was just I actually teared up because I had never seen that before. And I want to make sure that even when I'm writing, romances that are male, female, and hetero seeming, or completely hetero, like in book 2, that you're still getting the other kinds of romances along the way.
Yeah. And you can always tell when an author's really put the effort into making sure that representation happens.
Yeah. And I do love, have you read Rebecca Thorne's Can't Spell Treason Without Tea series?
Yes, we love it. We had Rebecca on when it first came out because we're so in love with the book.
It's so great.
Yeah.
And I will never get over her dedication for book 2, which for everyone who complained there were lesbians in book 1, there's twice as many in this one. Just for you.
I love it.
And we appreciated it so much.
Yeah.
So great. Uh, well, as with many of your novels, the book is set in a gas lamp-lit, historical inspired
Mhm.
world. What draws you to this setting?
Well, I am such a history geek. And I'm one of those people who ever since I was a kid has been reading history books for fun. And I get so many great ideas from them also. And real history can be so much wackier and so much less plausible than many of the things we see in fiction.
Mhm.
And I spent years and years actually studying European history as part of, I did a master's degree in music history, specializing in opera history and in Central Europe. And then I did a PhD program. Um, and I was studying opera in Vienna and in Hungary. And it all ends up coming out in my books because, for these books, if this is a fantasy world, but very much my guiding principle as I was writing it would be if our world had this whole pantheon of gods that I've created that are real, and magic worked and magical creatures were all around, then maybe what would have happened? And this is my made up world's middle of the 19th century. So as I was working on this, there's a whole geeky plot about fountain pens because I love fountain pens so much myself. And I spent an absurd amount of time researching exactly which kind of fountain pens you might be using in the middle of the 19th century in Austria. Even though Austria is not a country in this book, but I wanted it to feel consistent and coherent.
Mhm.
So everything is sort of mid 19th century with magic and gods. So, the fairies are extremely unhappy that steam trains are becoming a thing and laying these iron tracks across the continent, which is the worst thing. If you're a fae and you can't touch iron, stuff like that. It was just, for me, it helps when I'm coming up with a fantasy world if I have a real analog in my head of, okay, some point in history. And because it's fantasy, I can mash things up. I don't have to be exact or be accurate, but it helps me to sort of lay the groundwork and understand the world better.
I was gonna say most authors pick fantasy so that they can just make everything up. So it's really interesting that you're kind of somewhere in the middle.
My first two books for adults, Masks and Shadows and Congress of Secrets, they were both set in the real world in history with magic, this kind of alchemy being done behind the scenes. And, they both came very directly from my PhD research.
Mm.
And so I agonized and agonized about getting all the stuff right. And luckily I had spent a ton of time in Vienna where Congress of Secrets is set. I lived there for 2 years and I visited it various other times. Um, but it's an awful lot of work to do for every single book. And it was doable for me, not only because I'd already spent years studying this stuff, but because at the time I wrote them, I lived in Leeds right next to a fantastic postgraduate library, the Brotherton Library, where I was able to do my research. And then we moved from Leeds to a small town in Wales where there are no universities around here. No, and although theoretically, if you pay £2, you're supposed to be able to borrow books through the libraries, they won't send them from the universities to a regular public library. It always gets declined. And if you aren't independently wealthy, it costs a lot of money to keep on buying, the level of research, the number of research books that you need to be sure that you're really getting it right. Or, with everyone has a couple mistakes, but you're mostly getting it right.
Mhm.
So that was part of why I honestly switched, over to writing in fantasy worlds, is because after having done all those years in postgrad, I I feel anguish when I get historical bits wrong. You're so trained. You have to make sure you can footnote every single thing you
Yeah.
say. And, I could tell myself most readers won't care, but I still care.
I
And
get it.
even
And
if I think I shouldn't.
you can guarantee there's always one reader somewhere that knows everything.
Always, always.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful romantasy I read decades ago. It's called The Sun and the Moon by Vonda McIntyre. And it's set at the court of Louis XIV, in which they've just brought in a mermaid. And the heroine is a composer who ends up composing an opera. And I read it while I was doing my postgrad interviews for studying in opera history. I had I, at that point, had already studied music history for years. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is just wonderful. And I had a chance to meet Fonda McIntyre a couple years later. So, I went over to fangirl all over her. And she's like, oh, I just feel so depressed because after I published that, I got all these letters from experts on French opera in this particular year saying why I couldn't have done those, why this particular thing wouldn't have worked. And I was like, oh, come on. It was close enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we already talked about the main character being bi, but is there any more representation that you'd love to keep seeing more of in your genre or just in general?
I mean, all sorts, honestly, because the more inclusive we can be, the more of a wide range that we could include in all of our books that we write and that we read, the more plausible they'll be, because our real world is way more inclusive and way more diverse than most fiction of any kind. And most fiction can't even try to convey all of that. So honestly, just the more the better. Right now, I am very frightened for trans rights. It's I the terrible thing about the current events is I don't know how much to say out loud in public about my personal connections, but I do have various personal connections to trans people I love and care about deeply, and I am very frightened for them and their safety right now, especially the youngest ones. And I think something I learned growing up just from being born in the late 70s and seeing how much things changed over the decades is that the more people that of a certain group, the less you're likely to be prejudiced against them. As soon, there's a tipping point, because when I was in high school, I could not have come out to my friends in high school. I could not have come out in our high school. I knew people. I knew one guy who he and a friend who I didn't know them well enough to know if this is true or not, apparently, but they said that it was just a platonic, guys being affectionate, holding hands as they walked around, and they got beaten up really badly. I was in college when Matthew Shepard happened. I don't know if that much that came over to the UK, but horrible, horrible things. And as I watched over the years, there was this sort of tipping point where, like, first there was just one gay actress on screen, Ellen, and then there got to be more and more, and then more and more people were coming out, and people were actually changing their minds, like the people around them, because you can think all these things about a scary group that you're not a part of and you've never met, but when you find out that that group is actually these people you love, you're much less likely to not question the messages anymore. And I think so, although not everyone can meet individually members of the groups they're scared of, I think the more that as authors we try for a wide range of representation in our stories, the more they'll have fit characters in their head who don't match the stereotypes, who don't match the fear mongering.
That's lovely.
Well, this is a big jump from what we just discussed, but you have over 50 distinct works listed on Goodreads, which is absolutely mind-boggling. How do you continue to find new inspiration, and how do you even prevent from not repeating what you've already done?
It is so mind-blowing to me too, actually, at this point. Because I think there are two kinds of writers that I've met so far, and they're the writers who they sell their first short story and they're ready to start charging thousands of pounds to lead workshops on how to be a great successful writer. And they're the writers who will sell whatever number, like you could sell 2 million copies, which I have not, and they'd still be saying, oh, I don't know. And I wrote my first article on how to, for a magazine, like a week ago, from one of my publicists, and I was fighting imposter syndrome the entire time I did it. So it's good to be reminded that there is actually a good number on Goodreads, and I do know what I'm talking about most of the time. But what really works for me is, by now I've sort of figured out across my career the kinds of things that get me inspired. So travel gets me inspired. I mean, that's an expensive option. That's a, a challenging option in all sorts of circumstances. But for me, whenever I can, going to a city that I don't know very well, walking around, going to a museum, uh, just being surrounded by new kinds of input is that really gets creativity flowing for me. Usually not while I'm traveling, because when I'm traveling, my mind's sort of like busy absorbing everything. But when I get home, I'm usually full of ideas.
Yeah.
Also, for me, reading history, because it just it so many. I can't overemphasize this. Like so many wildly thrilling and exciting and scary things have happened in the past, and reading about how people coped with them and reading about similar patterns popping up across the centuries is really interesting, and it gets your mind working. So for instance, in Wooing the Witch Queen, Felix is officially the Archduke of Astarion, which is an archduchy within the Seraphin Empire. So he ought to have quite a bit of power, you'd think. And that's certainly what his neighboring king, the queen of his neighboring kingdom, thinks about him. And she blames him for everything that, the Astarion has done. However, what actually happened was that he inherited the title when he was still a young kid. And the regent who moved in to look after things and be his guardian until he was 18 was actually just in it to consolidate his own power base. And so he was quite abusive. He very, very carefully managed to separate Felix from any kind of support network, anyone who could have helped him, anyone who could have gotten, free of the influence, so that by the time Felix was 18, there were all sorts of reasons why, although his regent stopped being his regent and sort of names himself, the prime minister, the regent was the one still in power, and Felix was just the puppet being used. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have come up with that idea if I hadn't read about all the times that different regents did try doing that or did succeed in doing that to 19th century rulers in various German kingdoms. And, even there was a real attempt made with, Queen Victoria in the UK. Her mother and her mother's boyfriend tried really, really, really hard to get her to sign these papers and to say that, even when she became queen, her mother's boyfriend would still be in charge. He would still be on top. So, so reading about that kind of thing gives me all sorts of inspiration for what my own characters might do in similar situations.
I would love that type of brain that's able to do that, because it just doesn't, I just don't know why, I just can't attach myself to like research or reading into things, even though I love it.
Just the same. Yeah, he's a fantasy writer also. And he is just, he bound, well, it's the funny thing is, he's a physicist and he bounces off history books the same way I bounce off the science, And I come from a very scientific family. My parents are both mathematicians. They really expected me to study math or science in college. And my brain does not work that way. I respect it, but I'm not there. But, years ago, when I was in my 20s, I read Julia Cameron's Artist Way trilogy. And one of the things that really stuck from that was the idea of she had this thing she called an artist state, and she recommends doing it, I think, once a week or at most once a month. And it's a time when you go out and you're on your own without anyone else to talk to, and you go somewhere that gets you excited in some way, like it gives you some kind of stimulation, gets ideas moving, and you may have to try lots of different options before you figure out what it is for you. And, for some people, it could be a knitting shop and all the colors and all the, that kind of visual stimulation. There was a while when I lived in Leeds when on my lunch breaks, every so often, I would say, I'm doing an artist date. And I'd go over to the city art gallery. Or some people go to the zoo or, whatever. And if you're experimenting with whatever gets your ideas flowing, and then do it on purpose whenever you can.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
You've hinted a little bit, but can we get some more hints about what might be coming for the rest of the series? What are you most excited about readers to see?
Oh, so many. Every book in this series should work as a standalone. Possibly book 3, maybe less because of everything that's built. Well, I would hope people would enjoy it more if they've read the first 2, but I'm still trying to make it as standalone as possible. Every book has a happy ending for that particular couple. But at the end of each book, I really want readers to read that just the very last little bit of a scene and last line and think, oh my God, I need the next book. And before having read book one, I don't want to spoil too much of book two, but I would say that when you've seen the characters in book one, you'll understand why it's an enemies to lovers romance in book two, which I had so much fun with. Because they are very opposite and they really strike sparks. And of course, because this is the Queens of Villany trilogy, he is more of the well, he's not an alpha hole hero, Yeah. None of the heroes in this book are going to be jerks in this series. But as compared to Felix in book one, who is very much not physically, he's never going to win a fight. He's never going to like be punching someone to defend her honor, whatever. But she doesn't need that. She's the one who's going to be like punching someone who looks at him wrong.
Oh, I love that dynamic.
Yeah. This is that, touch him and die dynamic. She's the protective one. And the hero of book two is on the surface more of a traditional looking romance hero. He is a general. He does calisthenics every day. He's built. But the heroine, with her magical power and her incorrigibility and her recklessness, is very much in charge. And she is very, like, everyone knows. Like, you might not want to do a sword fight with him, but he is so much less dangerous than she is. And she is, and I've had a lot of fun with that, kind of flipping it around and then getting to, I'm so excited about the book. I just started writing book three, Melting the Ice Queen, just to get to finally play with that arranged marriage trope and also really go into, in my head, I've been thinking of book one is the coziest, book two is the steamiest, and book three is the swooniest. Is like, because I really want that. These are people who, these two women, they met once when they were kids and, they didn't even have a romance yet, but like, I just want people by the end of the book to really know they were always meant for each other. This is like, it would be a travesty for either of them to ever be with anyone else, So I'm having fun with that.
We're very excited.
I can't wait.
We always ask before we go, what are you enjoying at the minute? Any book, TV show, anything you'd like to give a little shout out about?
Oh, absolutely. I'm in the middle of reading Sarah Beth Durst's The Enchanted Greenhouse, and I am really loving that so far. I mean, I love her work. I love The Spell Shop, and this is absolutely living up to my high expectations.
Wonderful.
Oh, and I'm sorry. I'm going to really, really fast fit one more thing in. I wanted to very quickly fit in. Tanya Huff's direct descendant. I read ARC recently. It's not coming out for a couple more months, but it is the cutest, funniest, cozy horror sapphic rom-com.
Ooh,
that sounds good.
I love all of those words together.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. We're so excited to read it. My copy is held by customs right now, but I'm most of it is.
Yeah, I meant to put mine in the background, but I was rushing to get here and I completely forgot. But I'm so excited to start it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hold it up. Woo!
There we have it. I love seeing a little bit of the inside of writers' brains. I honestly, if I ever go quiet in interviews, it's because I'm like, they know so much. I'm inferior. I don't belong.
I really like that, like the search for inspiration.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
And it, like, to me, it works for, like, in a certain way. Like, every time I go to a museum or just see new things, all I can think of are just like this taglines, like "what if" or this and that. But then I forgot most of it. So, but yeah.
I mean, I find I don't even have to leave the house to do stuff like this. Like I'll be watching something on TV and
Yeah.
somebody will run a business that I never considered could be a business before, and I'd be like, oh, that would make a good quirky romance.
I know,
Uh,
yes.
Things like that. And recently, because I'm into painting so much now, I do find I want to put my hobbies in books, but also like the way that I see the world kind of changes with every hobby or like interest that I acquire. So now when I'm walking around, I'm kind of seeing the way that, how would I paint it? And somehow that sometimes helps me describe scenes as well. Like
No,
it does aid my writing in that way.
that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah. Where was the last place that you went that you felt inspired?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I can't remember. I guess I was last year when I was in the museum. What the hell was I there to see? Something specific, wasn't it? Oh
Dinosaurs.
yeah, I remember. Yeah, well, yeah, that too. But it was like an astronom
Yeah.
things and like about stars and stuff. But there was so much more about because it's like a technological, not technological, like there are like airplanes and old airplanes and boats, and then there was part about like retro home appliances and stuff, and that was there was also one about mining. There was like a lot of daggers, which was cool because I was like, I want
Mm.
all of them, and I think I had a few ideas there, so I guess that would be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Look, I don't leave the house very often these days. I'm sure I've done something since then, but I really loved going to the Van Gogh live exhibit
Hmm.
a couple of years back. That was very magical. They had all the paintings like projected onto the walls with music and they were moving, and that was an experience. What?
Sorry, I lied. I remembered one. I was in an
Yeah.
opera a few weeks ago.
You was at the opera the other
And I
day.
was literally writing you an inspiration for like at this these vampires sitting in a balcony because it was just so vibey. It was like the National Opera building and
Yeah.
it was
I
just beautiful.
I think it's weird because I used to feel always so creative whenever I left the house, and like I think my brain was using it as a coping mechanism.
Mm.
But because I'm now so aware of all the ways it makes me uncomfortable, I find it hard to
Yeah.
feel find anything like that. Like the last time I properly went outside was at Christmas to go to the Christmas markets, and it was a really great experience for me because I got to see kindling in a bookstore. But it was also a fucking horrible experience because I was anxious. I was scared I was going to get an IBS flare up. I didn't. There was no need to be scared of it, but I still was.
Mm.
It was busy. I can't like regulate my temperature between going outside and going into hot shops. Like that really pisses me off.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I'm struggling these days to find that. I would love to start going to museums and stuff again.
I miss it. I just wish I could be or not even comfortable. Like I would be able to spend a whole day alone in the museum. My issue is
Yeah,
the motivation to get up and leave the house and go there.
I know because the
Because once
house
I'm all
is so big.
cozy and like it's
Yeah.
just I see the time that I can spend on doing my hobbies instead of like being outside.
Yeah.
And if I would
That's
go, yeah.
that's a part of my personality that I'm really like finding resentment in at the minute because I don't even know what I'm capable of anymore because I just want to always be in my comfort zone, like in my little bubble, and I'm not getting out to do anything. And I'm like, a part of me knows that if I was capable of it and it was something that I needed, then my body would give it to me because I've been in that place before and like I'd known when it's time to kind of get out.
Hmm.
But and also like I think it's okay to spend your life comfortable instead of like putting yourself in positions where you just feel awful because even though you can get good experiences out of it, is it always worth it
Mm,
if
yeah.
you feel so like pressured and uncomfortable all the time? I think I'm finding it difficult to really find where I stand with that at the minute.
Yeah. It's funny because I was thinking of it was a few weeks since I was thinking during my deep time in a shower. which sounds weird, but it's not. I was just thinking a lot. And one of the
Yeah.
things I was like, I kind of miss stepping out of my comfort zone and like trying out new things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do too, but it was easier. It
it
used to
was
be
easier.
easier. I was better. I mean, I knew no other way to live than forcing myself into everything.
Yeah.
And but it drove me to burnout at the same time.
Mm,
So I don't know. I find it really hard.
yeah.
I did like also though because the last place that inspired me was actually Cornwall.
Mm.
Um, I went, I want to say 2 summers ago now, and I wrote a lot of my poetry there for my second book, Where Lost and Hopeless Things Go. Like, and actually, that was the place where I knew I wanted to start writing my zombie book, and I wanted them to flee to a caravan site because there was
Oh,
a day when it was really vibey and grey and misty and moody, and I was like, this is eerie and cool, and that was kind of how I decided to set my zombie book on a caravan site. So
fair
I
enough.
did tell a lie.
You did that.
Yeah. But I'm just glad I kind of have a brain where I can still find inspiration even if I'm a little hermit.
Honestly, sometimes it's a problem because every time I watch something or
Yeah.
read something, all I can think of are like new ideas, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
shut up,
Yeah.
just let me
And
enjoy
the
things.
same. And then especially when I'm reading, I can't focus on the book because I'm
Yeah.
writing something in my brain and that's kind of annoying.
Yeah, I get it. Same, yeah.
Life is interesting.
Too.
We're gonna be posting bonus content on Ko-fi these days.
It's true.
Yeah, so keep up with us on Ko-fi and we're on Blue Sky, which we talk about in a last episode. But I don't know what if
Now,
you
in the
guys are
upcoming one, we talk
in the
about
upcoming episode. I
yeah,
don't know.
because in 2 weeks we already did we already recorded an interview with Samantha Lee, the writer of Joy, which
Yes.
is behind Rachel right now.
Yeah.
A
I
little
haven't
bit.
updated my background, I'm
Yes.
afraid.
Um, so you can be excited for that. We have still so many good interviews coming. It's incredible, actually.
We do. At this moment in time, we've not even started posting season 4 yet, and we've already recorded some really great episodes.
I know. It's
So that's
like
exciting. That's it really, I
that's
guess.
it, yeah.
Not much to add these days.
No, that's what we have when we record 4 episodes in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Can get a little lot.
it
Yeah.
can get a lot of lit.
Little. Well, then I guess remember to,
Support women's rights,
but most importantly, support women's wrongs.
especially if she
Especially,
defends her mans.
there we have it. And until next time, we shall see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening. You can expect an episode every other Wednesday.
And be sure to expect lots of guests, including authors and queer creators.
While waiting for the episodes, feel free to check out our website, swordsandsuffix.com.
Be sure to submit to our forms if you're a queer creator to be featured on our blog or our monthly release lists.
You can also take part in Swords and Suffix and Scribbles, which is a monthly writing event to help you reach your goals.
And if you're just looking for a community that will be supportive and joyful, you can join our Discord server where most of our writing events take place, but also we just have lots of conversations and lots of fun.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok, where you can find us as all kinds of versions of Swords and Suffix.